The first time I saw Jake, I didn't just see him, I felt him. It was one of those moments where the world seemed to pause, just for a second, as if the universe was saying, "Pay attention." He was leaning against the brick wall outside the library, his dark curls catching the sunlight, his nose buried in a book. I was Mia, a 20-year-old journalism student with a notebook full of dreams and a heart too big for my own good. And he was Jake, the guy who would soon become my everything. The second time I met him, I remember the way he looked up when I accidentally dropped my stack of books in front of him. His eyes met mine, and for a moment, I forgot how to breathe.
Need a hand?
He asked, his voice smooth and steady, like he already knew he'd be the one to catch me when I fell. Our love story began like a cliché college romance. Awkward introductions, stolen glances, and late-night study sessions that turned into deep conversations about life, dreams, and the future. By the end of freshman year, we were inseparable. Jake was my safe place, the person who made me feel like I could conquer the world. But little did I know, the world had other plans for us. I've always been close to my mom. She was my confidant, my cheerleader, and my best friend. When I told her about Jake, she was thrilled.
Bring him home, Mia. I want to meet the boy who's stolen my daughter's heart.
I was ecstatic. Jake was nervous, but I assured him she'd love him. And she did. Or so I thought. The first dinner at our house was perfect. Mom cooked her famous lasagna, and Jake charmed her with stories about his engineering projects. But there was something in the way she looked at him, a flicker of something I couldn't quite place. I brushed it off. My mom was just being her usual protective self, right? Lila had always been the voice of reason in my life. She was the kind of friend who could read me like a book, even when I tried to hide my feelings. She pulled me aside after a campus event.
Mia, your mom was acting weird around Jake.
I should have listened, but I didn't. I laughed it off, brushing her concern aside like it was nothing. Lila, you're overthinking it. My mom's just protective. She's always been like that. But Lila wasn't convinced. Her usual playful demeanor replaced by something more serious.
Just keep an eye out, okay? There's something off about the way she looks at him. It's not just protective. It's, I don't know, different.
You're being dramatic. My mom loves Jake. She's always saying how sweet he is. And Jake loves me. There's nothing to worry about. But Lila's words lingered in the back of my mind, a tiny seed of doubt that I couldn't quite ignore. Over the next few weeks, I found myself watching my mom and Jake more closely. There were moments, like the way my mom's eyes lingered on Jake a little too long, or the way she laughed a little too loudly at his jokes, that made me pause. But I told myself it was nothing. My mom was just being her usual self, and Jake was just being Jake. College life with Jake was a dream. From the moment we met, it felt like we were living in our own little world, a bubble of love and laughter that nothing could burst. We spent our days attending classes, our afternoons studying in the park, and our nights wrapped in each other's arms. He'd kiss me under the stars, and I'd forget the world existed. We were in love, deep, passionate, and all-consuming. Every touch, every word, every moment felt like it was written in the stars. But even in the midst of our bliss, there were moments that made me pause. Like the time Jake canceled our date because he had family stuff to deal with. I remember sitting in my dorm room, staring at my phone, waiting for him to text me back. When he finally did, his message was short and vague.
Sorry, Mia. Something came up with my family. Rain check?
I told myself it was fine. That family was important, but the disappointment lingered. Or the way he'd sometimes seem distant, lost in thought. We'd be lying in bed, and I'd feel him tense up, his mind somewhere far away. What's wrong?
Nothing. Just tired.
But I could tell there was more to it, something he wasn't telling me. Still, I told myself it was nothing. Love was supposed to be easy, wasn't it? And for the most part, it was. Jake was my safe place, the person who made me feel like I could conquer the world. But looking back, I realized there were cracks in our perfect little bubble tiny fissures that I chose to ignore. Because the truth was, I didn't want to see them. I didn't want to believe that anything could come between us. Mom started calling more often, asking about Jake. At first, it was sweet. Just a mom checking in on her daughter's relationship.
How's he doing? Is he treating you well?
She'd ask, her voice warm and caring. But over time, her questions became more frequent, more pointed.
What does he like to do in his free time? Does he talk about his family much?
I thought it was just her being a mom. She'd always been protective, always wanted to know everything about my life. But then she started inviting Jake over, without me.
He's such a sweet boy, Mia. I just want to get to know him better.
I trusted her. She was my mom, after all. But looking back, I should have seen the signs. One evening, I came home from class to find Jake and my mom sitting together as they laughed over something. The sight made me pause. There was something about the way they looked, so comfortable, so familiar, that felt, off.
Mia, we were just talking about you.
Your mom's been telling me all these embarrassing stories about you.
I laughed, pushing down the unease that had settled in my chest. It was nothing, I told myself. Just my mom being her usual self. Lila confronted me again a few weeks later.
Mia, I saw your mom and Jake together at that cafe downtown. They looked cozy.
I felt a pang of unease, but quickly dismissed it. Lila, stop it. My mom would never do anything like that. And Jake loves me.
I'm just saying, something feels off. Your mom's been acting weird around him, and now they're hanging out without you? Don't you think that's strange?
I wanted to argue, to tell her she was wrong, but the seed of doubt had been planted, and it was starting to grow. That night, I lay in bed, replaying everything in my mind. The way my mom looked at Jake, the way he sometimes seemed distant, the way they laughed together, like they shared some secret I wasn't part of. But I trusted them. I trusted my mom. I trusted Jake. There was no way anything could go wrong. Or so I thought. It was a rainy afternoon. I had just finished my last class, and despite the dreary weather, the thought of surprising Jake with lunch made me smile. I headed to his apartment. There was only silence, except faint voices coming from the bedroom. I froze. I pushed open the door, and there they were. Jake and my mother tangled together. The room spun. My chest tightened. I couldn't breathe.
Mia!
I heard him call my name, but it was just noise. My world had shattered. My mind was a whirlwind. Anger, betrayal, disbelief. How could they do this to me? How could the two people I trusted most betray me in the worst way imaginable? The days that followed were a blur. I didn't go to class. I didn't answer my phone. I just sat in my dorm room, trying to make sense of what had happened. Lila came by every day, bringing food and trying to coax me out of my stupor, but I couldn't eat. I couldn't sleep. All I could do was cry. Jake tried to reach out. He called, he texted, he even showed up at my door, but I couldn't face him. Every time I thought about him, I saw him with my mom. And the pain was unbearable. My mom, too, tried to apologize. She left voicemails, begging me to talk to her, but I couldn't bring myself to listen. How could I ever trust her again? The worst part was the regret. I kept replaying everything in my mind, wondering where it all went wrong. Was it the day I introduced Jake to my mom? Or the day I ignored Lila's warnings? I felt like a fool for trusting them, for believing in a love that was built on lies. One night, Lila sat down beside me on the bed.
Mia, you can't keep doing this to yourself. You need to talk to them. You need to figure out what you're going to do.
I knew she was right, but the thought of facing them made my stomach churn. How could I ever look them in the eye again? How could I ever move on from this? But I couldn't stay in this limbo forever. I had to make a choice. For myself. For my future. And as much as it hurt, I knew I had to start by facing the truth. The final blow came a few weeks later. I had been feeling off for days. Nauseous, tired, and emotionally drained. At first, I thought it was just the stress of everything that had happened. But when the nausea didn't go away, I finally caved and bought a pregnancy test. I sat on the edge of the bathtub, staring at the 2 pink lines, my hands trembling. Pregnant. The word echoed in my mind, a cruel twist of fate that I couldn't wrap my head around. How could this be happening? How could I bring a child into this mess? But the shock didn't end there. A few days later, my mom called me.
Mia, we need to talk.
I could hear the guilt in her voice, and my stomach churned. When I met her at a quiet cafe, she looked pale.
I'm pregnant.
The words hit me like a ton of bricks. Pregnant. My mom was pregnant, and I knew, without her saying it, that Jake was the father. The irony was cruel, the pain unbearable. How could this be my life? How could the people I loved the most betray me in the worst possible way? As I sat in my room, staring at the positive pregnancy test, I couldn't help but wonder where it all went wrong. Was it the day I introduced Jake to my mom? Or the day I ignored Lila's warnings? The regret was suffocating, a constant reminder of the choices that led me here. I thought about the nights Jake and I had spent together, the way he'd kiss me, the way he'd whisper promises of forever. I thought about my mom, the way she'd always been my rock, the person I turned to when everything felt like too much. And now, they were both gone, their betrayal a gaping wound that refused to heal. Lila tried to comfort me, but even her words felt hollow.
You'll get through this, Mia. You're stronger than you think.
But I didn't feel strong. I felt broken, shattered into a million pieces that I didn't know how to put back together. Jake finally came clean a few days later.
Mia, I never meant to hurt you. It just happened.
I wanted to scream, to make him feel even a fraction of the pain I was feeling. But all I could do was cry. How could you do this to me? How could you do this to us? He didn't have an answer. He just stood there, his eyes filled with regret. And in that moment, I realized that no amount of apologies could fix what he had broken. I had a decision to make about the baby, about my future, about my relationship with my mom. It wasn't easy, but I knew I had to choose myself. For the first time in a long time, I put my needs first. I decided to keep the baby. It wasn't an easy choice, but I knew I couldn't walk away from this tiny life growing inside me. As for Jake, I let him go. Some wounds are too deep to heal, and I knew I could never trust him again. Healing wasn't linear. There were days when the pain felt unbearable, and days when I felt a glimmer of hope. Lila was my rock, reminding me that I was stronger than I thought. Slowly but surely, I began to pick up the pieces. I started therapy, working through the betrayal and the pain. I focused on my studies, determined to build a future for myself and my baby. And little by little, I began to heal. Forgiveness didn't come easily, but holding on to the anger was only hurting me. I forgave my mom, not because she deserved it, but because I deserved peace. Life moved on. I focused on my studies, my baby, and my future. The pain was still there, but it no longer defined me. I was Mia, strong, resilient, and ready to face whatever came next. Looking back, I realized that love isn't always enough. Trust, respect, and boundaries are just as important. I learned the hard way, but I learned. And that made all the difference.
Thank you for watching. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and comment for more inspiring stories and content.